Hi there, Vee Gang. How are you doing? It's Agovi Moti and welcome back to my YouTube channel. If this is your first time coming through to my channel, I'd like to say thank you so much for coming through. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment. And if you're a regular savvy, welcome back. Hey, welcome back to yet another episode of my channel. On this episode, guys, we have an imminent topic to discuss with my dearest friend Russo. You shall meet her shortly. But basically, we're going to be discussing an international relations discussion, an international relations topic, which is the Ukraine-Russia crisis that is taking place as we speak. If you're interested in this type of content, stay tuned for more. I'll be right back. Subscribe. So before we get into our discussion, I wanted to share a young history lesson with you guys to give you a background story as to how this situation came to be. The Russo-Ukrainian War is an ongoing armed conflict that began in February 2014, primarily involving Russia and pro-Russia forces on the one hand and Ukraine on the other. The conflict initially centered on the status of Crimea and parts of Donbas, which are internationally recognized as Ukraine. The conflict has included the Russian annexation of Crimea and Donbas war, naval incidences, cyber warfare, political tension, and Russian military buildup near the Ukrainian border from 2021. Russia moved forces into the separatist-controlled regions on 22 February 2022. This culminated in a full Russian invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February the same year. Following Euromaidan protests and the subsequent removal of the Ukrainian president Viktor Yanukovych on the 22nd of February 2014, and amidst pro-Russian unrest in Ukraine, Russian soldiers without insignias took control of strategic positions and infrastructure within the Ukrainian territory of Crimea. On 1 March 2014, the Federation Council of the Russian Federation unanimously adopted a resolution to petition Russian President Vladimir Putin to use military force in Ukraine. The resolution was adopted 7 days later. After that, the start of the Russian military operation on returning of Crimea, Russia then annexed Crimea after a widely criticized local referendum which was organized by Russia after the capturing of the Crimean parliament, whose outcome was for the autonomous Republic of Crimea to join Russian Federation. In April, demonstrations by pro-Russian groups in Donbas area of Ukraine escalated into a war between the Ukrainian government and the Russian-backed separatist rebel groups of the self-declared Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic. In August, Russian military vehicles crossed the border in several locations in Donetsk Oblast. The incursion by the Russian military was seen as responsible for the defeat of the Ukrainian forces in early September. According to Moscow Times, Russia has tried to intimidate and silence human rights workers discussing Russian soldiers' deaths in the conflict. International observers were denied access to areas controlled by the combined Russian separatist forces, accusing it of breaking international law and violating Ukrainian sovereignty. Many countries implemented economic sanctions against Russia, Russian individuals or companies. So what do we know so far? Russia has launched a full-scale military attack on Ukraine that opened with air and missile attacks on Ukrainian military facilities before troops and tanks rolled across the border from the north, east, and south. The Ukrainian military has fought back on multiple fronts. A senior United States defense official said Russia may be intent on seizing Kiev, the capital, and other key cities and ultimately installing a more friendly government. As Ukrainian forces fought back and civilians piled into trains, cars to flee, the US and European leaders rushed to punish Russia with strong financial sanctions. NATO moved to strengthen its eastern flank. In a television address, as the attack began, the Russian President Vladimir Putin said it was needed to protect civilians in eastern Ukraine, where Ukrainian forces and Russian-backed separatists have been fighting for almost 8 years. The Russian leader warned other countries that any attempt to interfere in Ukraine would, open quote, lead to consequences you have never seen in history. Close quote. Putin accused the US and its allies of ignoring Russia's demands to block Ukraine from ever joining NATO and offer Moscow security guarantees. Putin said Russia does not intend to occupy Ukraine but plans to demilitarize it. a euphemism for destroying its armed forces. He urged Ukrainian servicemen to immediately put down their arms and go home. Soon after his address, explosions were heard in the cities of Kiev. The US said Russia had nearly 200,000 troops arrayed near Ukraine's border before the invasion began. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing this wrongly. I'm really trying. But Chernobyl is in Russia's hands right now. That is a nuclear base in Ukraine. The Western world leaders have decried an invasion that could cause extensive casualties, topple Ukrainian democratically elected government, and threaten the post-Cold War balance. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg called Russia's attack a brutal act of war. By air, land, and sea, Russia launched a devastating attack on Ukraine soil. For months, President Vladimir Putin had denied he would invade his neighbor, but then he tore up a peace deal, sending forces across borders in Ukraine's north, east, and south. Airports and military headquarters were hit first near cities across Ukraine, including the main Boryspil International Airport in Kiev. Then tanks and troops rolled into Ukraine. New US sanctions also focused on military and financial institutions in Belarus, which Russia is using as a staging ground for its troops moving into Ukraine from the north. The United Kingdom Prime Minister Boris Johnson has said he would aim to cut Russia off from UK's financial market. The European Union and Western allies, including Australia, Japan, and South Korea, have announced similar sanctions. Macron has accused Putin of duplicity, saying he and other European leaders had been discussing the details of the implementation of the Minsk agreements with Putin just hours before the Russian president launched the operation, referring to the 2015 pact that established a shaky ceasefire in the region. So why would Putin want to invade Ukraine, you may ask? President Putin has frequently accused Ukraine of being taken over by extremists ever since its pro-Russian president Viktor Yanukovych was ousted in 2014 after months of protests against his rule. Russia then retaliated by seizing the southern region of Crimea and triggering a rebellion in the east, backing separatists who have fought Ukrainian forces in a war that has claimed over 14,000 lives. Late in 2021, he began deploying big numbers of Russian troops close to Ukraine's borders. Russia has long resisted Ukraine's move towards European Union and West defensive military alliance NATO. Russia's invasion claims that Ukraine is threatening their historic future as a nation. Russia has refused to say if it seeks to overthrow Ukraine's democratically elected government, although it believes that ideally Ukraine should be freed, cleansed of Nazis. Mr. Putin spoke of bringing to court those who committed numerous bloody crimes against civilians. President Putin partly blamed his decision to attack on NATO's eastward expansion. He earlier complained Russia had nowhere further to retreat to. It's absolutely mandatory to ensure Ukraine never ever becomes a member of NATO. He has described the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 as the disintegration of historical Russia. He has claimed modern Ukraine was entirely created by communist Russia and is now a puppet state controlled by the West. President Putin has argued that if Ukraine joined NATO, the alliance might try to recapture Crimea. President Putin says, let's imagine Ukraine is a NATO member and starts these military operations. Are we supposed to go to war with the NATO bloc? Has anyone given that any thought? Apparently not. In President Putin's eyes, the West promised back in 1990 that NATO would not expand not an inch to the east, but it did so anyway. That was before the collapse of the Soviet Union. So what now? Me and my friend, me and my girl, we're going to be discussing this as she's a former IR student herself. Alrighty, stay tuned for this. So hey guys, my friend Trisha is finally joining us. Say hi, Trisha.
Hi guys, my name is Trisha.
So what is your take on this Russian-Ukrainian crisis that's taking place right now?
Well, I think that Russia is justified somehow. At the same time, it's not.
Yes.
So I'm going to talk about how it's justified. Think of it in this way. If Russia is to invade Mexico and it sends its troops to Mexico, is America going to feel at ease? Definitely not.
No.
So what NATO is doing to Russia right now is the same scenario with what I just explained. So somehow, that's why I'm saying that somehow.
I was actually researching about the realism perspective, which was saying that human nature is actually selfish. So this is a selfish act by Russia. However, human nature tries to work with survival and security issues as well.
Definitely.
So this is like, I feel like for the realists, it's one of those. But Russia is only acting to try to protect itself, as much as it may be a selfish act. But it is also an act for survival and security.
So why did you say that it's selfish?
Because it's not considering Ukraine. It's not considering like what Ukraine is feeling.
It's
emotions.
not about what Ukraine is feeling right now. It's about survival.
Yeah, but it's not like...
Russia, remember that in 2014 it was sanctioned by America and European countries.
Yes.
And it had to create some alternative policies, like Look East policy as well. Good relations with China. So China, that's why China is backing Russia right now. When it was sanctioned, it was suffering economically, and then it introduced some relations with China, and now China is its biggest
supporter.
Not really supporter. Russia and China, okay.
They have issues, but not deep issues like USA and China.
But Russia is exporting most of its goods to China, and China imports about 50% of its goods from Russia.
That is deep. That is deep. So do you actually think that there's a Soviet agenda? Like trying to bring back Soviet Union back into existence? Because there's a high chance that Putin may be trying to bring back Soviet together. I mean, last year he signed a law that allowed him to be in power until 2036.
Wow.
Yes. So, I mean, come on now. I'm seriously sensing a Soviet agenda.
Yeah, by the annexation of Crimea as well, I think so. It's really...
It's a begin.
Yeah, it's trying to be introduced.
It's a begin. Hi, boy. But I think that if Trump was president, we would not be having this conversation right now because, hear me out. When you look at like when Trump was in power, he was not friends, but like he was able to broker peace agreements in the Middle East, right? He was able to go to North Korea, American president went to North Korea for the first time ever, not even first time in a long time, ever.
Right.
And then he was even, I don't want to use the term friends, but he was civil with Putin as well. Like, I think that Trump would not have initiated a NATO expansion program that would include Ukraine, you get? Not to say that Biden is the only one who's in charge of the expansion program of NATO, but if you look at NATO, the majority of military that is put in there is from America. So technically, America has a lot of influence in NATO.
It's the brain behind this whole idea. Because America, actually, the reason why America is involved is because it promised Europe, because Russia was threatening Europe, saying that if you allow Ukraine to join NATO, then I'm going to cut you off from my gas supply, because Europe depends on Russia for gas supply for about 40% of its gas supply. So that's why Germany is kind of hesitant. It doesn't want to really get involved because most of the gas routes from Russia are coming into Germany, and then Germany is now sharing the gas from Russia to other European countries, and they've been investing a lot of billions of dollars into a new gas pipeline.
Do you think that the sanctions are enough? They have recently come up with sanctions that are targeting Russian banks, Russian finance system, military system. Do you think that is enough to kind of stop Putin? I mean, Putin probably...
Russia will survive.
They will survive.
They already gave Russia sanctions in 2014.
That is so true. That is so true.
Europe also needs Russia to survive.
So I actually think that this is like a hegemonic power battle. I don't actually think it's about Ukraine entirely. I think that it is about USA versus Russia. Why do you think America is involved? Well, besides being the big brother of the world, as they always have been throughout the entire, why do you think they're involved right now?
The reason why America is involved is because NATO has been an existential threat to Russia, and America is one of the members of NATO. And when Ukraine has been pushing the agenda of joining NATO, Russia felt unease.
Yes, threatened.
Right?
Yes.
It felt threatened. So the way Russia is reacting is the same way America is to react if Canada and Russia become best friends, or if Russia goes and annexes Mexico and puts its troops in Mexico. America is not going to feel at ease at all. So somehow Russia is justified. And going to America, the reason why America is involved, it's like I said, it's actually one of the members of NATO, and it's supporting what Ukraine wants, right? In its support, Russia is threatening to cut Europe off from its gas supplies, which goes through Germany, which is the reason why Germany is hesitant right now on this whole issue. It's not really saying much about this whole issue because most of the natural gas pipelines are coming through Germany, and they've been investing a lot of billions of dollars into a new pipeline that goes through Germany to many European countries. Europe depends on Russian gas, like about 40% of its gas is coming from Russia. So America now is involved in this issue of gas because America also has gas, but America is involved because Europe and NATO members that they should back Ukraine in joining NATO, and if Russia is going to cut them off from its natural gas,
America will supply the gas.
America will supply the gas, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
It also promised that it will talk to Qatar, which is a natural gas alternative, a biggest natural gas alternative, that it will actually provide gas to Europe through Qatar. So this is how America is involved.
It's a money matter.
It's more like a business, political issue, you know? Yeah, because they are threatening each other with gas. We are in winter.
Yes.
Europe depends on gas for survival. Yes. Right?
Yes.
So if Russia cuts Europe from its gas, despite the hiking prices in gas, then Europe is going to suffer. If this was happening in summer, then they still have like a lot of time to look for alternatives. So it's actually more like a threat to each other, business threat.
Kiev's membership to NATO is incompatible with Russia's regime concept of a Russian security interest. What's even crazy is that US high-profile experts such as Henry Kissinger and Stephen Waltz and Ukrainian power broker Viktor Pinchuk, they brokered an endorsement of the idea of Finlandizing Ukraine. That basically means Ukraine, just like Finland, will be able to function with the West and with the East without creating any problems. That's what that means. Ukraine will be free to associate with the East and the West, but refrain from NATO membership in order to keep strong economic ties with Russia. Do you think that is a sustainable solution? Like balancing out relations between the East and the West, basically.
I don't think it's a sustainable solution because one way or the other, Ukraine is going to be one-sided.
Yes. Do you know what's actually really funny? Ukraine is not a democracy, hey? Okay, they do have a democratically elected president who's there right now, but it's actually not a democracy. They still suppress freedom of speech. It's wild how people are going crazy about the fact that, okay, hear me out. I'm not saying what Russia did was good, but at the same time, for Ukraine to even be part of the EU, they need to change their democratic policies.
Remember, Turkey is part of NATO.
Yes.
And it's not democratic.
Yes. But I'm talking with reference to the EU.
All right.
Yes, and EU membership and how EU is claiming that Ukraine has a chance to be part of the EU officially. But still they haven't yet changed certain democratic things about themselves. And there's also another issue that I don't think that it would work bringing together East and West, because as much as Ukraine depends on Russia for certain things such as gas and etc., there are still certain things that Ukraine normally runs and pushes responsibility from Kiev to like Brussels or Washington, like this particular issue. You get? There's a lot of westernization that Ukraine really wants that Russia doesn't want. So I don't think it would balance out because Ukraine is pushing towards more an EU Western agenda rather than a Russian agenda.
That's true. And definitely one is going to weigh another one down.
Yes.
And I think in this case, Russia is going to be weighed down, and Putin is not ready for that.
No.
He's not going to allow that to happen.
No.
Not anytime
soon. No, not today, Felicia. Ukraine, as a small country living alongside a large and aggressive neighbor, should accept a reduction of its sovereignty, especially in foreign policy, and should maintain independence from but good relations with Moscow and the West. That's the idea of what Finlandizing would bring for Ukraine. But will Russia treat Ukraine with dignity? Should Kiev fulfill the Minsk agreement in the way Moscow has envisioned? And to what degree do or should Kiev-Moscow relations be contingent on developments in the broader East-West divide in foreign affairs? However, on the liberal perspective, it would look at the idea of a prosperous and democratic Ukraine, which poses a threat to Putin's autocratic government. Ukraine is also a threat to Putin's political regime because Putin's regime is an autocratic regime. The idea of an economically comfortable democratic society contrasts with the largely conservative society of Putin's Russia. Western countries are concerned on the geopolitical changes if Ukraine is to join NATO or the EU. Realists would underestimate the internal societal dynamics. They depict Ukrainian geopolitical standing ambiguous as a consequence of its own historical and cultural divide between the country's pro-Russian East and pro-European West, accepting without question that Ukraine has become something of a territory for the encounter of rival geopolitical forces. And then the liberal side, they tend to disregard with the role of power politics in international relations, the lack of anti-corruption effort or sluggish pace of reforms, and the reluctance of key EU members to give a green light for joining the EU and NATO. Realists would say that Ukraine is a victim of their own history and location, whilst liberals would say that Ukraine is a lieutenant to the West in the West standoff against Russia. So what's your take on the Russian-Ukrainian conflict?
Well, I think that somehow Russia is justified because, like I said, Russia can't be at ease when NATO, which is an existential threat for Russia for a very long time, wants to expand to its neighbor. At the same time, Ukraine can do whatever it wants to do because it's an independent country.
Yes, it's a sovereign
country.
country.
If it chooses to join NATO, it can join NATO. So it's kind of a complicated situation that we have at hand.
Yes.
It's going to lead into a disastrous dilemma.
I really think that this is like one of the biggest cases in international system, in the international relations field since the Cold War, since World War II. It's just been very dramatic. And even that fact that on Friday, the UN Security Council had a meeting and then Russia vetoed any action to be taken in Ukraine. I mean, how then could they come up with a conclusion or decision knowing that Russia could, majority of the times, vetoes 3/4 of the things that the UN suggests them to do in different countries. I really think that Ukraine needs to strengthen its voice. As you said before, it's a sovereign country. They have the right to do as they please, when they please and how they please to do it.
Another thing, actually, sorry to cut you off, but I read an article where Russia was actually saying that NATO promised that they're not going to expand eastwards. And then NATO is saying, we didn't say that.
That is complicated.
So it's kind of a complicated situation that we have at hand. You promised Russia that you're not going to expand eastwards.
And you're literally
when you're
expanding.
actually expanding eastward, not only eastward, but to my neighbor.
Yeah, it's a threat. It's definitely a threat. Russia is bound, even America is bound to react like this. So yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment. If you enjoyed this type of content, please do let me know. I just thought it would be really interesting to bring a brilliant, high honors graduate in the field of international relations, to discuss about this.
Future diplomat.
Future diplomat, you know what I mean? So yeah, see you in my next upload. Remember to like, subscribe, and comment. God bless.
Bye.
Bye.